The scariest thing about Damien Moretti wasn't what he could do to people. It was the fact that after 5 years he still remembered me. Rain hammered against the hospital windows hard enough to make the entire pediatric wing tremble. The sound wrapped around the building like a warning I couldn't escape. Outside, Manhattan dissolved beneath sheets of cold November rain, headlights bleeding across wet asphalt in long streaks of gold and white. Inside room 214, a little girl named Sophie finally stopped crying long enough for me to adjust the blanket around her tiny shoulders. "Will the storm go away soon?" she whispered sleepily. I forced a smile even though my body felt like it had been running on caffeine and regret for the past 48 hours. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said softly. Storms never last forever. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth because some storms absolutely did. Some followed you across state lines, across years, across entire lives. My shift had officially ended almost an hour ago, but County Mercy was understaffed again, and I couldn't leave while 3 nurses scrambled through the chaos downstairs after a multi-car pileup on the Brooklyn Bridge. My sneakers squeaked against polished linoleum as I stepped into the hallway, rubbing exhaustion from my eyes. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. Everything smelled like antiseptic, stale coffee, and sleep deprivation. Normal, safe, predictable. Until the elevators opened. 4 men stepped out first, dark suits, black coats dripping rainwater onto the floor, broad shoulders, expressionless faces. Every instinct inside me went rigid. The hallway suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Then he appeared behind them. Damien Moretti stepped out of the elevator like the storm itself had followed him inside. My breath stopped so abruptly it hurt. 5 years disappeared in a single heartbeat. He looked older now, harder. The sharp angles of his face seemed carved from stone beneath the hospital lights. Black hair brushed neatly away from his forehead, though rain still clung to the edges. His charcoal overcoat fit perfectly across his shoulders, expensive enough to pay my rent for a year. But it was his eyes that destroyed me. Steel gray, calm, controlled. The same eyes that once watched me like I was the only thing in the world capable of calming him down. I hadn't seen those eyes since the night I betrayed him. Fear crawled slowly up my spine. He found me. After all this time, he found me. One of the nurses near the station froze mid-conversation, clearly recognizing the kind of power that didn't need introductions. Damien barely acknowledged anyone around him. His gaze locked onto mine immediately. Direct, unwavering, like he'd already known exactly where I would be standing. My pulse stumbled violently. I should have run. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to turn around and disappear into the nearest stairwell, but my feet wouldn't move. Damien crossed the hallway slowly, his polished shoes silent against the floor. The men behind him stayed back near the elevators, giving him space the way people gave space to loaded weapons. Up close, he smelled like rain, smoke, and expensive cologne. Familiar enough to make my chest ache, dangerous enough to make me forget how to breathe. Claire, my name sounded different in his voice now. Lower, rough, like something worn down by years of swallowing anger. I folded my arms tightly across myself, pretending it stopped my hands from shaking. "You shouldn't be here." His expression didn't change, and yet I am. The hallway suddenly felt too small, too bright, too exposed. 5 years ago, I stood in a Brooklyn apartment wearing a wire beneath my sweater while federal agents waited outside to arrest the man standing in front of me. I told myself I did it to save my younger brother. I told myself I had no choice. But none of those excuses mattered when Damien spent 18 months fighting for his freedom because of information that came from me. I'd spent every day since expecting this moment. Revenge always arrives eventually. That's what fear teaches you. Damien glanced towards Sophie's hospital room behind me before looking back into my eyes. "Your shift's over." It wasn't a question. My stomach tightened. "How do you know my schedule?" One corner of his mouth moved slightly, but it wasn't a smile. "I know a lot about you, Claire." Thunder shook the windows again. I realized then that everyone in the hallway had gone quiet, watching, waiting. Damien reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a pair of black leather gloves before speaking again. "Get your things?" My heartbeat slammed painfully against my ribs. Why? His eyes held mine for 3 endless seconds. "Because if you stay here tonight," he said quietly, "someone is going to try to kill you." There are moments in life when fear does not feel loud or dramatic. It feels cold, quiet, like standing under fluorescent hospital lights while the man who once knew every secret about you calmly tells you someone wants you dead. I stared at Damien Moretti and forgot how to blink. The rainwater still clung to the shoulders of his dark coat, tiny droplets catching the sterile overhead lights like shattered glass. 5 years ago, I used to wait for him near the window of a small apartment in Brooklyn just to hear the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. Back then, Damien walked into rooms like a man carrying the weight of an entire city on his back. Now he walked like the city belonged to him. "You are lying," I whispered, though my voice sounded weak even to me. Damien's expression never shifted. I wish I was. The hallway behind us remained unnaturally silent. Nurses avoided looking directly at him, pretending to study charts on monitors while stealing nervous glances from the corners of their eyes. One of the older doctors near the station quietly turned and disappeared through a set of double doors the second Damien looked his way. Fear recognized power faster than words ever could. I hated that part of me still recognized it too. I tightened my grip around the patient file in my hands. "What do you want from me?" For the first time since stepping off the elevator, something flickered in Damien's eyes, not anger. Something worse. Exhaustion. "Right now?" he asked quietly. "I want you alive." My chest tightened painfully. I looked away first. That had always been my weakness around him. Those eyes, cold enough to terrify grown men, yet somehow capable of looking at me like I was the only honest thing left in his world. I forced myself to breathe slowly. "You cannot just walk into my hospital after 5 years and expect me to trust you." "Trust?" His voice stayed calm, but I heard the bitterness underneath it. "Claire, you stopped trusting me long before you disappeared." The words landed harder than I expected. Memories came rushing back before I could stop them. A tiny apartment above an Italian bakery in Brooklyn. Rain tapping softly against old windows. Damien standing shirtless in the kitchen at 2 in the morning making terrible coffee, because he knew I would not sleep after night shifts. The sound of his low laugh when I complained about his cooking. The way he used to touch my wrist absent-mindedly whenever he passed me in crowded rooms, like he needed reassurance I was still there. Then the memory changed. Federal agents, flashing lights outside, my younger brother crying in another room while someone shoved paperwork into my shaking hands. One decision, one betrayal, one night that destroyed everything. "Claire." Damien's voice pulled me back into the present. "Look at me." I hated that I still listened when he used that tone. Slow, steady, impossible to ignore. I lifted my eyes reluctantly. "Who wants to hurt me?" I asked. Damien glanced briefly toward the windows overlooking the rain-soaked city before answering. "A man named Victor Orlov." The name meant nothing to me, but the way Damien said it made ice spread slowly through my stomach. "Why?" "Because he thinks you know something. I do not. That will not matter to him." Thunder rolled across Manhattan again, rattling the glass faintly. Damien stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice enough that only I could hear him. "Listen carefully to me. 2 nights ago, someone broke into your apartment." Every muscle in my body froze. "What?" "Nothing was stolen because they were not looking for money." My heartbeat turned uneven. "How do you know that?" His jaw tightened faintly. "Because my people caught them before they found what they came for." I stared at him in disbelief. "Your people?" "Yeah, you have been watching me?" He did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. Anger finally cut through my fear. Sharp. Hot. "You do not get to do that anymore." Damien absorbed the words without reacting. "Probably not." "Then stop acting like you still own my life." Something dangerous flashed across his face, then vanished just as quickly. Not rage, hurt. Real hurt. "Claire," he said softly, "if I wanted control over your life, you would not have spent 5 years hiding from me successfully." The truth in that statement unsettled me more than anger would have. One of the suited men near the elevator suddenly touched his earpiece before looking toward Damien. A silent exchange passed between them. Damien's entire posture shifted instantly, sharper, alert. The air around him changed in the same terrifying way storms changed before lightning struck. He looked back at me. "We are leaving. I am not going anywhere with you. You do not have a choice tonight." My pulse jumped. "Do not threaten me. I am trying to save you." He reached into his coat slowly, carefully, like he already knew sudden movements around me would only make things worse. Then he held out a small silver object resting in his palm. My breath caught instantly. It was my necklace. The tiny silver cross I lost the night I betrayed him 5 years ago. Damien's grey eyes locked onto mine. "You left this in my apartment," he said quietly, "and I never stopped waiting for you to come back for it. Some memories do not fade with time. They sharpen. like broken glass buried beneath skin, waiting for the smallest touch to cut you open all over again. I stared at the silver cross resting in Damien's palm, and suddenly I was 22 years old again, standing barefoot in his apartment, while rain slid down the windows and jazz played softly from an old record player in the corner. Back then, I used to leave that necklace everywhere, on his kitchen counter, beside his bathroom sink, tangled in his sheets after long nights spent talking until sunrise. Damien always found it before I did. You would lose your own heartbeat if it was not attached to you, he used to tease quietly while fastening the chain around my neck with careful fingers. I swallowed hard against the memory. Why do you still have it? Damien looked down at the necklace for half a second before closing his hand around it again. Because you never came back. The words hit somewhere deep and ugly inside me. Guilt had lived in my chest for 5 years like a second heart, constant. Heavy. Impossible to escape. I looked away first because I could not stand the way he still looked at me, like he remembered every version of who I used to be before fear ruined us both. Claire. His voice softened slightly. We need to leave now. I forced myself back into the present. I am not getting into a car with you. One of the security guards near the elevator shifted subtly, scanning the lobby windows overlooking the parking lot below. Damien noticed immediately. He noticed everything. You think I came here tonight to hurt you? He asked quietly. I folded my arms tighter across myself. I do not know why you came here. The honesty in my answer seemed to affect him more than anger would have. For a moment, exhaustion shadowed his face again. 5 years, he murmured almost to himself, and that is what we became. My pulse stumbled. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed violently in the pocket of my scrubs. The sudden sound made me jump. Damien's eyes sharpened instantly. Do not answer it. But I already pulled it out automatically. Unknown number. My stomach tightened. I should have ignored it. Instead, I pressed accept. Hello. Silence. Then slow breathing. Controlled. Deliberate. Cold spread down my spine. Claire Bennett. The male voice sounded calm. Too calm. You should not trust men who bury cities in darkness. Every muscle in my body froze. Who is this? A soft chuckle answered me. Tell Damien Moretti that ghosts from Moscow do not forgive easily. The line disconnected. I realized my hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Damien stepped forward immediately. What did he say? I stared at him, pulse hammering painfully. How did they know I was here? Something dangerous settled behind Damien's eyes then. Not panic. Calculation. The terrifying calm of a man used to surviving storms. He held his hand out toward me. Phone. Why? Claire. The tone alone made me obey before I could stop myself. Damien handed the phone to one of his men without looking away from me. Trace the call, he ordered quietly. The man nodded once and disappeared down the hallway. I suddenly became aware of how close Damien stood now. Close enough to smell rain and cedarwood on his coat. Close enough to see the faint silver scar near his jawline that had not been there 5 years ago. Time had changed him in sharp, quiet ways. But one thing remained exactly the same, the way his entire focus narrowed whenever he thought I was in danger. You should have stayed hidden, I whispered before I could stop myself. Damien's expression darkened slightly. I tried. The answer confused me. What does that mean? He looked toward the windows briefly, watching rain race down the glass in crooked rivers. The night you disappeared, he said quietly, I let you go because I thought distance would keep you safe. My throat tightened painfully. Damien, do not. His voice remained calm, but I heard the fracture underneath it. Do not apologize unless you actually regret leaving. The words stole the air from my lungs, because the terrible truth was that I regretted it every single day. I regretted the silence. I regretted the fear. I regretted the way I still searched for him in crowded streets sometimes without realizing it. Somewhere downstairs, thunder shook the building again. Damien glanced toward the elevator as his expression hardened abruptly. Decision made. You are coming with me. Damien, tonight is not negotiable. My heartbeat accelerated as he stepped closer, lowering his voice enough that only I could hear him. 5 years ago, you chose your brother over me. His grey eyes locked onto mine with devastating intensity. If I have to choose between your anger and your funeral tonight, Claire, I will survive your anger. People think fear feels sharp and immediate. They imagine screaming tires, breaking glass, alarms in the dark. But real fear is quieter than that. Real fear is sitting in the back seat of a black SUV beside the man you once loved, while Manhattan disappears behind rain-covered windows, and realizing your heart still remembers the sound of his breathing. I sat rigidly against the leather seat as the city blurred outside. Water streaked across the tinted windows in silver lines, distorting neon signs and headlights into soft smears of color. Damien sat across from me rather than beside me, one arm resting against the door, grey eyes fixed on the traffic ahead with terrifying calm. The interior of the SUV smelled like cedar wood, rain, and expensive leather, familiar enough to make my chest ache in dangerous ways. No one spoke. The driver focused silently on the road while another black SUV followed closely behind us through midnight traffic. Every few minutes I caught glimpses of Damien's reflection in the glass. Hard jaw, tired eyes, the faint scar near his mouth catching flashes of streetlight whenever the car passed beneath intersections. 5 years ago he used to smile more. The realization hurt worse than it should have. I folded my arms tighter around myself and stared down at my hands. You should have let me stay at the hospital. Damien finally looked at me. And let Orlov's men walk straight through the front doors? You do not know they would have. I do. The certainty in his voice unsettled me. How? His jaw tightened slightly, because I know how men like Victor Orlov think. Silence settled between us again, heavy, complicated. Rain tapped softly against the roof of the SUV like impatient fingers. I watched Damien loosen the cuff of his dark coat slightly, exposing the silver watch beneath it. Small details, tiny movements. Strange how memory worked. I still remember the exact way his hands looked when he tied a tie in the mirror, the exact sound of his low laugh when I stole fries off his plate because I refused to order my own, the exact expression he wore the first time he told me he loved me. Some people never really leave your system. They become part of your bloodstream. Claire, I looked up slowly. Damien's eyes were on me again, softer now somehow. More human than the man who walked into the hospital surrounded by security guards. Did you eat tonight? The question caught me off guard. What? You heard me. I blinked in disbelief. You dragged me into a convoy of armored SUVs because someone may want me dead and you are asking if I had dinner. One corner of his mouth moved faintly, not quite a smile, but close enough to hurt. You used to forget meals when you worked double shifts. My throat tightened unexpectedly. He remembered that too. Of course he did. I looked back toward the rain-streaked window before answering quietly. I had coffee. Damien exhaled slowly through his nose, like the answer irritated him personally. That is not food. You do not get to care about things like that anymore. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Silence followed instantly. Damien looked away first. The faint warmth disappeared from his face so quickly it made guilt twist painfully through my chest. Right, he said quietly. I forgot. I closed my eyes briefly. 5 years apart and somehow we still knew exactly how to hurt each other without even trying. The SUV slowed suddenly as iron gates appeared ahead through the rain. Massive black steel surrounded by stone walls and security lights. My stomach tightened immediately. Where are we? Home. The word landed strangely between us. The gates opened automatically as the convoy rolled forward into a private underground entrance beneath a towering Manhattan skyscraper. Marble walls reflected soft gold lighting across polished floors. Expensive, cold, untouchable. This was not the Damien I once knew in Brooklyn. The man beside me now ruled a completely different world. The SUV stopped smoothly inside a private garage. One of Damien's men stepped forward immediately to open the door, but Damien exited first. Rain blew faintly through the open entrance, brushing damp air across the garage. He turned toward me and held out his hand automatically. The gesture felt so familiar my chest physically hurt. For one dangerous second I almost took it. Then reality came crashing back. I stepped out on my own. Damien lowered his hand silently. Something unreadable passed through his eyes before disappearing beneath calm control again. We moved toward a private elevator surrounded by men in dark suits. Every single person around Damien watched him carefully, waiting for instructions before breathing too loudly. Power clung to him now in ways that felt heavier than wealth, colder, more isolating. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Damien gestured for me to step inside first. The doors closed behind us in complete silence. Then the elevator began climbing. Higher, higher, higher. Manhattan glittered outside the glass walls as the city slowly unfolded beneath us, like a galaxy of white and gold lights drowned in rain. I suddenly became aware of how alone we were. No guards, no driver. Just me and Damien suspended above the city that ruined us. My pulse quickened slightly. Damien. I forced myself to meet his eyes. What are you really not telling me? The elevator continued rising silently for another few seconds before he answered. The little boy upstairs, he said quietly, has not spoken in 11 months. My confusion deepened instantly. What does that have to do with me? For the first time that night, real emotion cracked through Damien's calm expression. Small, fragile, almost invisible. Because, he said softly, you are the only person he agreed to see. The higher the elevator climbed, the harder it became to breathe normally. Manhattan stretched beneath us in endless ribbons of light, blurred by rain, beautiful in the same cold way diamonds were beautiful. Untouchable. Dangerous. I stood frozen beside the glass wall while Damien remained perfectly still near the control panel, one hand resting loosely in the pocket of his dark coat. The silence between us carried years inside it. Questions. Regret. Words neither of us knew how to say anymore. You never told me you had a son, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. There are many things I never told you. The answer settled heavily between us. Before I could respond, the elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic sound. Warm light spilled across polished black marble floor. The penthouse looked less like an apartment and more like the top floor of a private museum. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, revealing Manhattan glowing beneath the storm like another universe entirely. Soft jazz drifted faintly through hidden speakers somewhere overhead. Expensive art lined dark walls. Everything felt elegant, controlled, empty. The kind of place built for a man who spent very little time sleeping. I stepped out cautiously while Damien remained behind me for half a second longer. Strange how aware I still was of him. The sound of his footsteps, the quiet rustle of his coat. Even after 5 years, my body recognized him before my mind could catch up. Stay close tonight, he said calmly as the elevator doors closed behind us. Why? Because not everyone in this city is loyal to me. The honesty in his voice unsettled me more than reassurance would have. A woman appeared from down the hallway almost immediately. Mid-50s, dark grey dress. Warm brown eyes that softened slightly the moment they landed on me. Mr. Moretti, she greeted quietly before glancing toward me with obvious curiosity. Damien removed his coat slowly. Maria, this is Claire Bennett. Something flickered across the woman's expression then. Recognition, maybe. Or surprise. Miss Bennett, she said gently, it is nice to finally meet you. My stomach tightened instantly. Finally. Damien noticed my reaction immediately. Of course he did. Maria has worked for my family since I was a teenager, he explained calmly. She knows who you are. The woman smiled softly before taking Damien's coat from him. The boy's awake, she said quietly. He has been asking for you. Damien nodded once. Has he eaten? A little soup, not much else. Something changed in Damien's face then. Subtle, small, but unmistakably softer. The terrifying man who walked through hospitals surrounded by security guards disappeared for half a second, replaced by someone exhausted and deeply worried. I had never seen Damien look afraid before, not once in all the years I knew him. But whatever waited down that hallway scared him in ways bullets probably never could. Claire. I looked at him carefully. You do not have to do anything tonight you are uncomfortable with, he said quietly. If he does not want to talk to me, I cannot force him. I know. His grey eyes lingered on mine for a second longer than necessary. You were always good with broken things. The words hit harder than they should have. Before I could answer, small footsteps echoed faintly somewhere deeper inside the penthouse. Damien turned instantly. The little boy stood at the far end of the hallway clutching the sleeve of an oversized grey sweater, maybe 6 years old, dark hair slightly messy like he had been sleeping, pale skin, wide green eyes that looked painfully familiar. My breath caught immediately. He had Damien's eyes. Exactly Damien's eyes. The little boy froze the moment he noticed me standing there. Silence stretched across the room. Damien's entire body seemed to go still beside me, waiting, hoping. The child looked at me carefully, almost nervously, before his gaze dropped toward the silver cross necklace still dangling loosely from Damien's hand. Something shifted in the boy's expression then. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped closer. Leo, Damien said softly, his voice gentler than I had ever heard it. This is Claire. The child stopped a few feet away from me. His small fingers tightened slightly around his sweater sleeve. I knelt instinctively to make myself less intimidating. Hi, Leo. No response. The little boy simply stared at me with solemn green eyes that seemed far too old for his age. Damien remained silent behind me, watching everything with terrifying focus. I noticed it then. The stack of children's drawings clutched tightly against Leo's chest. Crayons, dark scribbles, storm clouds, tiny stick figures standing beneath rain, trauma drawings. My chest tightened painfully. "Those are beautiful," I said gently. Leo blinked slowly. Then, after several endless seconds, he stepped closer and handed me one of the papers without speaking. My fingers trembled slightly as I looked down at the drawing. A tall man stood beside a little boy beneath a dark sky, and beside them, a woman wearing a silver cross around her neck. My heartbeat stopped completely. I looked up slowly toward Leo, then toward Damien. Damien's expression had gone perfectly still again, but something raw flickered deep inside his eyes. "He drew that 3 weeks ago," he said quietly, "before he ever knew your name. Children always notice the things adults try hardest to hide. Fear, loneliness, love. They see it in the way people breathe, in the silence between words, in the eyes of a man pretending he has not already lost too much." I sat frozen on the marble floor of Damien Moretti's penthouse, staring at the drawing in my hands while rain trawled slowly down the massive windows behind us. The paper trembled slightly between my fingers. A little boy, a tall man beside him, and me. Somehow me. My silver cross necklace had been drawn carefully around the tiny figure's neck using a faded grey crayon. How could he possibly know that necklace? I whispered. Damien stayed perfectly still near the hallway entrance, but tension rolled off him in quiet waves because he found a photograph. I looked up sharply. What photograph? For a second, Damien hesitated, the smallest hesitation. But it was enough. "You kept pictures of me." His grey eyes met mine steadily. "I kept everything." The confession settled softly into the room like another heartbeat. Leo remained standing quietly a few feet away, watching both of us with solemn green eyes. He had not spoken a single word, yet somehow his silence filled the entire penthouse louder than conversation ever could. I forced myself to look back at the drawing. "He thinks I belong here." "No," Damien said quietly. "He thinks you belong to me." My chest tightened painfully. 5 years ago, maybe that would have been true. Before fear, before betrayal, before the sound of federal agents pounding against apartment doors destroyed everything we built together. Leo suddenly moved closer and sat cross-legged beside me on the floor, slow, careful, like approaching frightened animals required patience. My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Hi again," I said softly. He stared at me for another long moment before glancing down toward the drawing in my hands. Then he pointed silently at the woman in the picture. "Her?" I asked gently. Leo nodded once. "That is me." Another nod. I looked toward Damien in confusion. "You said he has not spoken in 11 months. Damien folded his arms loosely across his chest, though exhaustion shadowed every line of his face now. "He has not." "Then how does he communicate?" "Mostly drawings, sometimes gestures." I looked back toward Leo carefully. Trauma. Deep trauma. I recognized it instantly. Children who experienced overwhelming fear often retreated inward when emotions became too heavy for words. Silence became safer than language. I had seen it before in pediatric recovery wards after terrible accidents or devastating loss. But this felt different somehow. More personal. Leo continued studying me with unsettling intensity before reaching slowly toward the silver cross necklace still hanging from Damien's hand. Damien looked down at his son for half a second before silently kneeling beside him. The movement startled me. I had never seen Damien kneel for anyone before. Leo touched the necklace carefully, tiny fingers brushing across the silver chain. Then his eyes lifted toward me again. Something fragile flickered across his face. Hope, maybe. My heart ached unexpectedly. "Can I ask what happened to him?" I said quietly. Damien's entire expression closed instantly. Wall, steel, distance. No. The sharpness in his voice surprised even Leo, who lowered his eyes immediately. Regret flashed across Damien's face just as quickly. He exhaled slowly, rubbing one hand across his jaw like exhaustion physically hurt him. "Not tonight," he corrected more gently. I watched him carefully then, really watched him. The powerful man feared by half the city looked completely different standing beside his son, softer around the edges somehow. Human in ways I had forgotten he could be. Maria appeared quietly from the kitchen carrying a tray with tea and soup. The older woman smiled softly when she noticed Leo sitting beside me. "That is the closest he has sat to anyone new in almost a year," she murmured. Damien looked toward his son with unreadable eyes. "Leo," he said gently. "It is late." The little boy ignored him completely and continued staring at me instead. I smiled faintly despite myself. "I think he disagrees." One corner of Damien's mouth almost lifted. Almost. Then Leo did something that made the entire room go silent. He reached carefully toward my hand resting against the floor, tiny fingers wrapping lightly around mine. My breath caught instantly. The contact felt impossibly small and impossibly important all at once. Leo looked down at our joined hands for several seconds before slowly leaning sideways until his shoulder rested lightly against my arm. Trust. Simple. Silent. Immediate. I looked up at Damien in shock. Real emotion cracked through his composure then. Not power. Not control. Pure disbelief. His grey eyes looked almost glassy beneath the warm penthouse lights. "He has not touched anyone except me since it happened," he said quietly. My chest tightened painfully again. Leo closed his eyes briefly against my shoulder like exhaustion had finally caught up to him. Instinct took over before thought could interfere. I gently brushed messy dark hair back from his forehead. The little boy did not pull away. Behind us thunder rolled softly across Manhattan. Damien watched us in complete silence. Then, after several endless seconds, he whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. "I think he remembers you. There is something heartbreaking about watching a powerful man stand completely helpless beside the person he loves most." Damien Moretti could command rooms with a single look. He could make grown men lower their eyes without raising his voice. But standing there in the soft golden light of his penthouse, while his silent son leaned against me instead of him, he looked like a man terrified to hope for too much. Leo eventually fell asleep against my shoulder sometime after 2 in the morning. One small hand still loosely wrapped around my fingers. Rain continued sliding down the windows behind us while the city glittered beneath the storm like broken stars. Maria quietly dimmed the lights before disappearing down the hallway, leaving only soft jazz and the distant sound of thunder filling the silence. I carefully adjusted the blanket over Leo's shoulders while Damien watched from across the room. He had not sat down once. "You should sleep," I whispered without looking up. Damien leaned lightly against the marble fireplace, arms folded across his chest. "I could say the same to you. I am not the one standing guard in my own living room." His expression shifted faintly. "Old habits." I glanced toward him carefully. "You always did that." "Did what?" "Stayed awake after nightmare." The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence followed instantly. Damien looked away first, jaw tightening slightly as memories settled heavily between us again. Brooklyn. Tiny apartment. Rain against windows. Nights when he sat awake beside the bed long after I fell asleep because shadows from his world followed everywhere. Back then, I used to slide my hand across the mattress until my fingers found his wrist just to remind him he was not alone. I hated that I still remembered details like that. Damien slowly loosened the cuffs of his black shirt before speaking quietly. "Leo started waking up screaming almost a year ago." I looked toward the sleeping child beside me. "After whatever happened." A slow nod. "At first he would still talk during the day, small things mostly." Damien's voice sounded distant now, controlled too carefully. Then one morning he stopped completely. Something inside my chest twisted painfully. Did doctors diagnose selective mutism? Damien let out a humorless breath. "Every specialist in Manhattan has seen him." And none of them could get near him. My eyes drifted back toward Leo's sleeping face. Even now, tension still lingered faintly in the child's expression, like his body had forgotten how to fully relax. Trauma stayed stored inside children differently than adults. It hid in silence, in nightmares, in tiny flinches nobody else noticed. What happened to his mother? I asked softly before I could stop myself. Damien went completely still. The air in the penthouse shifted instantly, dangerous in a quiet way. I regretted the question immediately, but after several long seconds, Damien answered anyway. "She died." My throat tightened. "I am sorry." He stared out toward the rain-covered skyline rather than at me. So was I. Something about the way he said it made my chest ache unexpectedly, not dramatic grief. Worse, the kind that settled deep into bones and stayed there quietly for years. Did Leo see it happen? Damien's grey eyes closed briefly, just once. Yes. Pain flashed across his face so quickly most people would have missed it entirely. But I knew him too well once. I saw everything. Damien, do not. His voice stayed calm, but exhaustion dragged through every syllable now. "Do not look at me like I deserve sympathy. Everyone deserves sympathy when they lose someone." He finally looked at me then. Really looked at me. Even men like me. The question landed softly but carried years inside it. Shame. Guilt. Loneliness. I realized suddenly that Damien did not see himself as someone worth mourning anymore. That terrified me more than the men outside hunting. Before I could answer, Leo shifted slightly in his sleep, fingers tightening around my hand. Damien's entire focus moved instantly toward his son. Protective. Automatic. Like breathing. I watched the transformation carefully. The feared man who ruled entire criminal networks disappeared whenever Leo needed him. All that remained was a father desperately trying to hold together what little family he had left. "He talks in his sleep sometimes," Damien said quietly after a moment. "Only a few words. What does he say?" Damien hesitated. Then his voice dropped almost to a whisper, "Mostly your name." My heartbeat stumbled painfully. "That does not make sense." "No," Damien agreed softly. "It really does not." I stared at him in disbelief. "You told him about me." He did not deny it. "Why?" His grey eyes held mine steadily across the room. "Because after you left," he said quietly, "you were still the best thing I had ever known." The confession stole every remaining breath from my lungs. 5 years. 5 years apart. And somehow this man still spoke about me like I had haunted every room he walked into since the day I disappeared. I looked down quickly before he could see emotion breaking across my face. But Damien already saw it. He always did. The city thundered softly beyond the windows while silence stretched between us again. Then, somewhere against my shoulder, Leo stirred in his sleep and whispered one tiny broken word into the darkness. "Claire." Some silences change everything. A single whispered word can crack open years of grief like lightning splitting a dark sky in half. Leo's tiny voice barely reached above the sound of rain against the windows, but the second he whispered my name, the entire room stopped breathing. Claire. Soft. Sleepy. Fragile, yet somehow louder than every thunderstorm raging outside. I froze completely beneath the little boy's weight against my shoulder. Across the room, Damien looked like someone had physically struck him. Real shock flashed openly across his face for the first time since I stepped back into his life. His grey eyes locked onto Leo instantly, every wall inside him collapsing all at once. "Oh my God," I whispered. Leo shifted slightly in his sleep, brows furrowing faintly like even speaking one word had exhausted him. His small hand still clung tightly to mine. Damien crossed the room slowly, almost carefully, like sudden movement might shatter the moment completely. "He has not said a word in 11 months, he said quietly, though his voice sounded rough now. Unsteady. I looked up at him. He said my name. Damien nodded once without taking his eyes off Leo. Yes, something tightened painfully in my chest. I glanced back down at the sleeping child beside me, trying to understand how any of this was possible. Why me? Damien finally looked at me then. Real emotion burned behind his eyes now, raw enough to make my pulse stumble. I do not know. The honesty hurt more than lies would have. For several long seconds neither of us spoke. The city glowed beneath the rain outside while soft jazz drifted through the penthouse like a memory neither of us knew how to escape. Damien slowly sat down across from me for the first time that night. Exhaustion settled heavily into his posture the second he stopped moving. I realized suddenly how tired he looked, not physically, soul-deep tired. Like carrying too much grief for too long had finally started hollowing him out from the inside. What happened 11 months ago? I asked quietly. His gaze drifted toward the windows. Leo and his mother were driving home from dinner. His voice remained calm, but every syllable sounded painfully measured now. Another vehicle forced them off the road. My chest tightened instantly. Damien rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw before continuing. Leo survived. Silence swallowed the room after that. He did not need to say the rest out loud. I looked down quickly at the little boy asleep against me, trying to imagine him trapped inside fear so overwhelming it stole language from him completely. Was it an accident? The second the question left my mouth, Damien's entire expression darkened. No, just one word. Cold enough to freeze the room, I swallowed hard. Because of you. Damien stared at the skyline for several endless seconds before answering quietly. Everything that happens around me eventually becomes because of me. The sadness in his voice unsettled me more than anger ever could. I watched him carefully beneath the dim lights. This was not the man newspapers whispered about in dark corners of Manhattan. This was someone carrying unbearable guilt while pretending his shoulders were still strong enough to hold it. Damien, do not, he interrupted softly. Please, his eyes finally met mine again. I can survive your hatred, Claire. I learned how to survive that already. My chest physically hurt hearing him say it so calmly. But I do not think I could survive you pitying me. Something inside me cracked quietly, because despite everything that happened between us, despite the betrayal and fear and ruined years between us, I had never once pitied Damien Moretti. I had loved him. Terribly. Completely. Probably still. Before I could answer, a sharp buzzing sound cut through the room. Damien's phone. The atmosphere changed instantly. He checked the screen once before standing immediately. Dangerous focus settled across his face again, like armor snapping back into place. "Stay here," he ordered quietly. I frowned. What happened? Damien ignored the question and answered the call near the windows instead, voice dropping low enough I could not hear everything. But I caught enough. "How many?" Silence. No police. Another pause. Then colder this time. "Find them before sunrise." My stomach tightened. Leo stirred slightly against my shoulder at the sound of Damien's voice change. The little boy's fingers tightened around mine again, even in sleep. Damien ended the call slowly before turning back toward us. Every trace of softness had disappeared from his expression now. "Claire." My pulse quickened instantly. "What?" He looked directly at me. "Someone breached your apartment building 20 minutes ago." I spread slowly through my chest. "What?" "My security intercepted them before they reached your floor." Fear hit me hard enough to steal breath from my lungs. Damien crossed the room again, faster this time. Controlled urgency radiated off him in quiet waves. "You are not leaving this penthouse until I know exactly who Olaf sent after you." "Damien, no." The single word stopped me cold. He crouched carefully beside Leo first, adjusting the blanket around his sleeping son with surprising gentleness. Then he looked back at me. "You still think this is about revenge?" His grey eyes darkened painfully. "Claire, if I wanted revenge for what happened 5 years ago," his voice dropped soft then. "More dangerous because of it. I would not have spent every night since trying to keep you alive." Fear changes shape when it stays with you long enough. At first it feels sharp and immediate. Then one day you realize it has become part of your routine. The way you lock doors twice before sleeping. The way your shoulders tense whenever unknown numbers call your phone. The way your heart starts racing every time someone you love walks out of the room. I sat awake beside Leo long after the city fell silent beneath the storm. The little boy slept curled against my side beneath a cashmere blanket, while dim lights reflected softly across the marble floors of Damien's penthouse. Somewhere near the windows, rain still whispered against the glass in endless quiet pattern. Damien had disappeared into another room nearly 20 minutes ago after receiving updates from his security team. I could still hear the low murmur of his voice through partially closed doors. Calm, controlled, dangerous in the way only powerful men learn to become after surviving too much loss. Leo shifted slightly in his sleep, tiny fingers still wrapped around mine. I looked down at him carefully. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes even while resting. Children should not carry exhaustion like that. My chest tightened painfully. "You should be asleep too." I looked up sharply. Damien stood near the hallway entrance again, sleeves rolled slightly past his wrists now, dark hair still damp from rain. Without the jacket and perfectly controlled posture, he looked less like the feared man whispered about across Manhattan and more like someone carrying the weight of an entire collapsing world alone. "I could say the same thing to you," I answered quietly. A faint tiredness touched his expression. Sleep stopped coming easily a long time ago. He walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond him in silver and gold reflections blurred by rain. "My team secured your apartment building," he said calmly. "Nobody gets near your floor tonight." "You keep saying things like that." Damien glanced toward me. "Because they are true." "No," I whispered softly. "Because you sound like you have been protecting me for years." Silence answered me immediately. Damien looked away first, which were answer enough. My heartbeat stumbled painfully. "How long?" He rested one hand against the glass, overlooking Manhattan before answering. "Since the day you disappeared." I stared at him in disbelief. "That is impossible." "No." His voice remained low and steady. "Just expensive." I shook my head slowly, struggling to understand. "Why would you do that after what I did to you?" Damien's jaw tightened faintly. "Because loving you did not stop simply because you broke my heart." The honesty in his voice stole every remaining breath from my lungs. He said it so simply. No accusation, no anger, just truth. 5 years of distance suddenly felt meaningless compared to the ache in those words. I looked down quickly at Leo sleeping against me because I could not survive the way Damien was looking at me right now. "You should hate me," I whispered. "I tried." My chest tightened again. "And?" A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth for half a second before disappearing. Turns out hatred is difficult when someone still owns every peaceful memory you have. God. I closed my eyes briefly against the ache building inside me. Brooklyn flooded back suddenly. Sunday mornings tangled in blankets while rain tapped softly against old apartment windows. Damien standing barefoot in the kitchen trying to make pancakes despite being terrible at it. The way he used to touch the small of my back absent-mindedly whenever crowded rooms overwhelmed me. I had spent 5 years trying to survive losing him. I never stopped to consider he might have been surviving it too. A sudden sound interrupted the silence, glass shattering somewhere downstairs. Damien's entire body reacted instantly. Every trace of softness vanished from his face like a switch flipping inside him. Leo startled awake beside me at the sharp noise, breathing unevenly. "It is okay," I whispered quickly, brushing his dark hair back gently, but Damien was already moving toward the hallway, fast, focused, dangerous. Another sound echoed faintly below us. Raised voices, not shouting, urgent, controlled chaos. My pulse accelerated instantly. Damien stopped near the hallway entrance and looked back toward me. Locked the door behind me. Fear crawled sharply down my spine. "Damien now, Claire." The tone alone made my heartbeat jump. Leo sat upright suddenly, eyes wide with panic as he looked toward the hallway. The little boy's breathing quickened immediately, trauma response. I recognized it instantly. "Hey," I whispered softly, pulling his attention back toward me. "Look at me, sweetheart." Damien hesitated for half a second, watching his son carefully. Something painful crossed his face. Guilt, maybe. Or helplessness. Then one of his men appeared breathlessly at the end of the hallway. "Boss." Damien stepped forward immediately. "What happened?" The man lowered his voice, but I still caught the words that turned my blood cold. "Someone got past security downstairs." Leo's tiny fingers clutched my sleeve instantly. Damien looked back at us one final time before disappearing down the hallway without another word. And for the first time since stepping into his world again, I realized something terrifying. Damien Moretti was not afraid for himself tonight. He was afraid for us.